Next, from the state capitol, we get reaction to Governor Quinn's State of the State address from lawmakers and lobbyists.
He's a kind fellow. I think he has the best intentions of the state at heart. His management style is a little loosey-goosey, so he's going to just have to bring it together. But before he brings this together, before any of this manages to fall into line, he's going to have to get a better fiscal footing so that we can base all these wonderful ideas on something and not just have these free-floating ideas that are feel-goods. I love the warm fuzzies like the best of us, but I like to pay for my warm fuzzies.
The governor only said the word pension 5 times. He didn't mention anything about the state's backlog of unpaid bills.
Nothing. As I said, warm fuzzies. Warm fuzzies all the way around, maybe laying some groundwork for a coming campaign. It just made me feel warm all over, but in our Illinois, we're not paying bills. So our Illinois is a bit financially shaky, and it's not really much better. If we take another hit financially, we had to put off a bond issue the other day because the treatments were so high because of our bad bond rating. We're not moving along real well. So as a result, these sound good, but they're out there free-floating. I don't see how we pay for them. We haven't paid for the programs we have out there now.
Senator Kwame Raoul, what are your thoughts on the governor's address?
It's a speech, and as far as speeches go, a decent speech. The speeches that I'm more interested in are speeches that take place after the job is done. Some of his speech was that, talking about what we've accomplished as a state, as a government within the state over the last few years, and so to that extent, it's a meritorious speech, and it is valuable to provide somewhat of a roadmap of where you want to go, and so he did a decent job of doing that, but I like speeches that talk about celebrating what we've done, and we've had speeches about pension reform for the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, maybe since I've been in the General Assembly, and we haven't given the speech of getting it done. We did do the 2-tier reform, but clearly we need to be a little bit more. We need to be more ambitious with it, and I think we'll accomplish it. I think focusing on Senate Bill 1, which is a creative approach that brings people together. I commend the Senate President for that creativity, and hopefully that'll be the thing that gets the job done.
I'll put you on the spot, and you can take a pass if you want. People are thinking that the Attorney General, Lisa Madigan, may challenge the governor. It's obviously a lot of speculation at this point. If she were to do so, the Attorney General's office would be open. Is that something that you might look to fulfill, or any other offices? What's the future hold for Kwame Raoul?
I have to acknowledge that given the speculation of what the Attorney General may do in coming months, and that is something that I have given some thought to. Given my professional background and my experience in the legislature, I think that would be an opportunity that does pique my interest. There are a lot of conversations that need to take place before I would go full force into any such effort. If I were given an opportunity to serve in such capacity, I would make the most of it, but there's a lot to talk about before we can say that I would be a candidate.
Senator Kirk Dillard, what are your thoughts on the governor's address?
Well, it was clearly an election kickoff speech by Pat Quinn, but no matter what the governor says, and I give him, the benefit of the doubt that he didn't create our state's problems, the credit rating agencies that look at the state of Illinois believe that the state's fiscal condition has gotten worse under Pat Quinn. Our unemployment rate is far above the national average. We're last in the Midwest in job creation, 48th in America. And even with the Democrats' big income tax increase, we have a backlog of bills that is at an all-time high. No state's ever taxed its way to prosperity. And the governor, he was beating the drum today and cheerleading for Illinois. The credit rating agencies, our unemployment rate, and the fact that we have a record backlog of bills shows we're continuing in a downward death spiral in a state that ought to be a leader in America, not somebody who's last in economic development, and we can't pay our bills on time.
You were a candidate for governor last time, nearly missed being the nominee. I presume you're running, or have you announced officially?
Not officially yet.
If you were the governor, how would you go about addressing the state's fiscal issues?
Well, I think you need a comprehensive overhaul of your tax policy in the state of Illinois. We heard no plan by Governor Quinn of how he's going to let the temporary income tax expire. You've got to create a climate that is one where private sector people will create jobs. You must solve your state's pension crisis. We just had an example of an Illinoisan who built a $4 billion factory in Iowa, not in Illinois, because he was worried about the state's looming pension crisis. Pat Quinn has been the governor for 4 years, has a political party of his own that controls the Capitol building, but he's been able to do nothing on the state's public pension crisis, which is a time bomb. And not only is it squeezing out services for education, for senior citizens and for law enforcement, it's squeezing private sector jobs out of Illinois to other states. And Governor Quinn's a nice man. He grew up in the same neighborhood as I did. He's done nice things for veterans, but he's not a leader. And he's got a political party controlling the legislature that's his own, and he's just not been able to get things done.
State Representative Barbara Flynn Curry, thanks for joining us. What was your thoughts on the governor's address?
I think he did a good job outlining the need to improve the economic climate, both by encouraging people to develop the skills they need for the jobs that are available, and by encouraging businesses to set up shop in Illinois, and by focusing on the needs of the worker. I was glad to hear him talk about the minimum wage. As I understand it, if the minimum wage were keeping up with inflation, we'd be just about where he'd like to get in a few years' time. So I think his focus on safety for people in schools, in malls, and churches was welcome, and I'm more than happy to work with him to try to find ways to restrict semi-automatic weapons and magazines with large capacity that are not needed for hunting, they're not needed for shooting, unless you want to be shooting up people.
If I might, let me ask you, just yesterday as we taped this, the House, that is, passed a $2.1 billion supplemental bill. Can you give us just a quick overview? What was the reason that was needed?
Well, in fact, it wasn't $2.1 billion. The Republicans couldn't do the math. They were double counting some money. When it came to general revenues, we're not talking billions. In fact, general revenues, the total amount was about $53.6 million, not billion, $1 million. And the appropriations members and staffs were agreed that between gubernatorial vetoes that we had not overridden and some new estimates about monies coming in, there was enough money to see to it that all those children in the care of the Department of Children and Family Services, that there will be staff to see to it that these kids are not abused and neglected. That when it came to mental health services in the community, we were able to put in $12 million that accidentally had been left out of the equation. So most of the money in this bill was either money finally going to pay health care bills for state workers, money which we had already reserved for this purpose, and federal and other funds. For example, the State Board of Education won a $35 million grant from the federal government, but without the spending bill, they would not have been able to use the money. So most of the money was not even state funds, it was federal funds, and to the extent that state funds were involved, it was money we already knew we were sooner or later likely to allocate. So it was a lot of hullabaloo about nothing, and if you had been here on Monday, you would have discovered that that very bill had strong bipartisan support. Came out of committee on a 9-2 vote, and suddenly on Tuesday, everybody's against it. I couldn't figure out what went wrong.
On the pension issue, everyone, obviously it's a major issue eating up the state budget. What are your overall thoughts on what the governor said, but also just in general, you knowing the issue as you do? What are the thoughts of getting some real reform passed this spring session?
I don't think we have a choice but to act. I think it's difficult to figure out something that will not be too hurtful, too painful for those state workers who have, as they point out rightly, they've done their fair share. So the job for us is to see to it that we can restore fiscal sanity to a pension system where we didn't do our fair share, but the reality is that we're going to have to do things that will cause some pain. My job is to minimize the pain at the same time that we are solving the fiscal problem.
Senator Bill Brady, what are your thoughts on the governor's address?
Well, he reminds me of Nehru. He's fiddling away while this state's crumbling. The rhetoric is one thing, and clearly it was a campaign address. He's on the ropes within his own party, Lisa Madigan and Bill Daley nipping at his heels, and yet he failed to address the real demands on Illinois. We've got billions of dollars in unpaid bills after he increased taxes billions of dollars on hardworking families. We've got 290,000 people fewer employed in Illinois under the policies of this. Every bond rating agency in the nation has labeled him as the worst performing governor in the country. So it doesn't give me a lot of hope that he's going to. He talks about courage, but what we really need is leadership. And I just haven't found a great deal of hope in the rhetoric that he put forward today.
He talked about pensions, and you've been very key on working on the pension issue. How would you rate the governor's leadership on that issue?
Well, let me just say this. If the people of Illinois, if I had the good fortune to be elected governor by the people of Illinois, we'd solve the crisis immediately. This is a crisis that needs to be solved, but it's going to take leadership. He's not been able to do that. It takes more than rhetoric to solve this crisis. It takes leadership.
And you were obviously the nominee of the party for governor last time around. What are your thoughts as far as trying again in 2014?
As I said, if I would be fortunate enough to be selected by the people of Illinois, we'll solve these problems. Thousands of people have asked me to run again to finish the job we started, and we're laying the groundwork to do that.
State Representative Phelps, what are your thoughts on the governor's address?
Well, you can tell he's running for re-election, that's for sure, because it was a very political speech. Talked about a lot of accomplishments that he did, and talked about that's our Illinois. Well, that's not my Illinois. You know, he was proud of closing a lot of those facilities. Well, all he did was send a lot of people to the unemployment line in my district.
What are your thoughts on the concealed carry issue that has come up with the court? And my understanding is you're going to be the member introducing some legislation on concealed carry.
Yeah, we filed House Bill 997, which a lot of people didn't think we needed to file because we got a court ruling in our favor. The court said it mandates the state of Illinois pass something reasonable within 180 days. Well, that clock is still ticking. That deadline is June the 10th, I believe. So if we don't pass something, Constitution carry is going to set in. So if you have a valid Ford card, anybody's going to be able to carry anything they want, anywhere they want. So, you know, the ruling's in our favor. So I'm waiting for the governor to be more specific and he hasn't brought any proposals to us.
Have you had any questions with people in his office about that issue?
We're trying, and more or less we were told that he's not going to negotiate with this. He's going to try to do his own thing, and he wants to tie in the assault weapon ban with concealed carry. And those are two different issues, and they should be treated two different issues.
Rob Carr, we just heard the governor's speech. One of the proposals was to raise minimum wage to $10 an hour in Illinois. What are your thoughts on that proposal?
Obviously, we're opposed to the proposal. We think it has a tremendous negative impact on the retail sector, and it'll have a tremendous negative impact on an already struggling teen labor market. The 16 to 20-year-old labor market is doing very poorly here in the state of Illinois, and they'll continue to do poorly.
What do you say on the opposing side, that people would say you can't make a living on $10 an hour?
I think minimum wage jobs were never intended to be jobs that support families. That's just not what they were set for. That's not the cost structure of retail, certainly not at entry-level positions. And frankly, as study after study shows on both sides, if you don't get kids into the market early and get them the job training skills they need, this hinders their economic growth and their future for decades to come.
And lastly, when you hear from your members, have they heard that this was coming down the pike, and what kind of reaction are you hearing from your members?
Frankly, they're apoplectic. They don't know where they're going to cut costs. They've already cut employment down. They think it's a great economic development tool for Governor Pence of Indiana or Governor Walker of Wisconsin. But it's bad news for the state of Illinois.
Senator LaHood, what are your thoughts on the governor's address?
Well, I listened intently to what the governor said. I commend him for making the pension problem the real focus of his speech. I think it has to be. What frustrates me a little bit is we heard almost the exact same thing a year ago, and here we are a year later after a session of the legislature from last year, and we're arguably worse off than we were last year. $100 billion in unfunded liability. And so, you know, the devil is really in the details and showing the leadership and the real courage to get this done. And so while I commend him on that, you know, we have to solve this pension system now. And there's not a more challenging time in Illinois' history than right now. And I know the governor talked about a lot of new programs, minimum wage, you know, clean water, scholarships for immigrant families, programs for veterans, but I almost equate it to when your house is on fire, you worry about putting out the fire instead of putting on a new addition, and the fire right now is our pension system. It's eating at everything else in our state, and we have to solve it.
Kim Maish with NFIB, give us an overview, what you thought of the governor's address.
Sure. Well, in general, I thought, you know, it was a pretty typical Pat Quinn speech. He talked a lot about a state that I know that he loves, and we are facing a lot of big issues. And of course, the biggest concern of the NFIB, the group I represent, small business owners, is the issue of minimum wage. We're already the fourth highest in the country at $8.25, and the governor today said he'd like to see that wage go up as high as $10. That would catapult us to being the top wage-paying state in the country in terms of the minimum wage. And in our opinion, that means higher job losses. Small business owners continue to struggle. They continue to pay their own bills, and to have politicians tell them how much they should pay in wages makes very little sense, particularly in a state where they can't pay their own bills, they can't pay their pension obligations, and they've just been downgraded. Why should small business owners take advice from a governor who runs a state like that?
Have you had feedback from your members as far as specifically what they say it would do to their businesses?
Well, we just came out with our 2013 member ballot, which was out in the field with our members here in Illinois. We have 11,000 small business owners as members. And particularly on the minimum wage, it was overwhelmingly, 85% of those polled said no way to a minimum wage hike, particularly now. But in general, and they were also very much opposed to tying the wage to the consumer price index, which would allow for automatic annual increases in the minimum wage. I don't know anybody who automatically gets a pay increase. It was usually based on merit and marketplace. And so that's what we're saying to the state. Just leave small business owners alone, let them run their business, let them be successful, and the jobs will come back.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.